My name is Grace Whitmore. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, my parents treated me less like a daughter and more like the household help. Every family gathering felt like I was trapped in an unpaid internship that never ended. Christmas, Easter birthdays, charity dinners, I was always in the kitchen, apron tied, smile fixed while my younger brother Ethan basked in praise and champagne. At the Whitmore family's annual investment dinner last year, I found myself polishing wine glasses in a sequined black dress that cost less than one of Ethan's watches. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and shallow laughter. My mother, Elaine Whitmore, stood by the bar, gesturing proudly toward my brother as he spoke with Harold's business partners. "Ethan's expanding the family portfolio," she said, voice bright and sharp as glass. Then her eyes landed on me. "Grace, be a dear and refill those trays. The servers are behind schedule again." I was 38, not 18 yet. Somehow she still managed to speak to me like I was the staff. My father, Harold, didn't even look my way. To him, I was simply the one who helps out. No one in that room knew that I owned a consulting firm in New York, one that managed assets worth more than most of those guests' entire portfolios. But I'd learned long ago that telling them wouldn't matter. In the Whitmore family, the truth only counted if it came from Ethan's mouth. I carried another tray of champagne through the crowd, the laughter swelling around me like static. Ethan clinked glasses with a hedge fund manager and winked at me as if I were his assistant. "Good timing, sis," he said. "Top up Mr. Harrington here, will you?" I obeyed silently. Richard Harrington, a name that would soon define everything, smiled politely, thanked me, and turned back to Ethan's bragging about quarterly returns. I remember that moment in slow motion, the chill of the glass stem between my fingers, the faint tremor in my hand that wasn't nerves but fury contained. All those years of silence had calcified into control. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Enjoy the evening, gentlemen." Inside, a different voice whispered, "Not much longer." As the music swelled and the lights blurred, I noticed something I'd missed before: how perfectly I'd been trained to disappear. My parents' friends saw me as background decor, well-mannered, helpful, forgettable. But invisibility can be a powerful disguise. It lets you watch a measure plan. It lets you see how fragile other people's superiority really is. The laughter in that room carried a brittle edge, the sound of people who believed wealth meant invincibility. My mother laughed the loudest. When she raised her glass for a toast, she didn't mention me. She never did. To Ethan, she said, "The pride of our family." Everyone clapped. I joined them, but my smile was steady, deliberate. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud. Strategy is quiet. After the applause faded, I stepped aside near the marble pillar, opened my phone, and checked the message that had just come in. Meeting confirmed. Harrington Global Investment Board, 10 a.m., Monday. My pulse steadied. The same man my family worshipped for decades would soon meet me not as Harold Whitmore's invisible daughter, but as the co-founder of Aurora Capital Advisors. In 48 hours, the balance of power would shift forever. Still, I kept pouring drinks until the last guest left, wiping the marble counters, while my mother complimented the caterers for keeping everything spotless. She didn't realize the spotless part was me. I looked up at the family crest hanging over the fireplace, a golden W. W that had once meant pride, legacy, belonging. Now it only meant hierarchy. That night, as I hung my apron on the kitchen chair, I promised myself that the next toast she gave would have to include my name or none at all. Because I was done being the family maid. I was done serving everyone else's success. And soon, the people who treated me like invisible help would learn exactly who they'd been standing on all along. The next morning, I drove through the iron gates of my parents' estate, the kind that whispered old money and new control. The Whitmore house looked like something out of a glossy magazine. White columns trimmed hedges, the illusion of perfection. Inside perfection came with orders. My mother, Elaine, was already in the grand dining room, surrounded by notes and flower samples. "Grace," she said without looking up, "you're late. We have a lot to organize before the gala." Richard Harrington confirmed. "It has to be flawless." Her tone cut through the air like glass. My father, Harold, sat at the head of the table reading the financial section of the Wall Street Journal. "Morning," I said, setting my bag down. He gave a short nod, eyes never leaving the print. You'll handle logistics, of course, Elaine continued. Catering, decor, seating charts, we can't afford any mistakes. The Harringtons have influence. I looked at the array of notes and invoices on the table. You could hire a planner, I suggested. No one understands our standard, dear. Besides, you have the time. My brother Ethan walked in, phone in hand, sleek in his navy suit. She's right, Mom. Let Grace handle the boring stuff. It's what she's good at. He smirked. I'll focus on the real work, introductions, investors' strategy. I bit my tongue. It wasn't worth arguing. My mother's laugh was brittle. Exactly. You've always had the charm for it, Ethan. Then turning to me, Grace, you might want to wear something understated this time. Last year's dress was unflattering. I'd worn a navy gown I'd bought myself, nothing expensive but elegant. I said nothing. Harold finally folded his newspaper. Grace, your brother's company is closing a deal with Harrington's fund soon. Be supportive. Don't interfere. There it was again, the unspoken rule of the Whitmore household. Ethan builds, Grace assists. I took a slow breath, forcing calm. I'm not interfering. I'm just asking for clarity. Don't be difficult, Elaine said, waving her manicured hand. You're part of this family. Do your share. I wanted to laugh. My share had always been invisible labor decorating, cooking, handling their charity events while they took the credit. I'd sacrificed career opportunities, weekends, even relationships to keep peace in this house. But peace built on obedience is just silence wearing a smile. As I left the room, I heard my father say, You know, Elaine, we should consider merging Ethan's fund with Harrington's directly. It would elevate the Whitmore name again. My mother sighed dreamily. And Richard could help Ethan get on the board at Easton Bank. Imagine the recognition. Recognition. That word burned in my chest. My family lived for it, society pages, charity banquets, social validation. They didn't care who did the work as long as they looked superior doing it. In the hallway, I stopped by an old photo framed in gold, Ethan at his Harvard graduation flanked by my smiling parents. I'd been there too, behind the camera. The only trace of me was the reflection in the glass holding their moment steady. Upstairs, I found the guest list for the gala. 200 people including Richard Harrington, his executive team, several state officials, and the Whitmore Foundation's biggest donors. I smiled bitterly. They wanted perfection. They'd get it, but not the kind they expected. That night, as I reviewed invoices and menus, I received an email from my assistant in New York. Aurora's presentation deck finalized. Confirmed 10 a.m. Monday at Harrington Global. I stared at the screen, heart steady. In 3 days, the man my family idolized would learn the truth. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I was building my own legacy, one they wouldn't understand until it was too late. 5 years earlier, I'd stood outside my father's office holding a resignation letter in one hand and a cardboard box in the other. Harold Whitmore had built an empire on control, and I had once believed being part of it meant stability. But that day, I realized control wasn't the same as care. Grace, this isn't emotional, he'd said, standing behind his mahogany desk. You're good with details, but finance requires vision. Ethan has that. You don't. My throat burned as I swallowed the humiliation. I'd worked 12-hour days managing operations, cleaning up Ethan's errors, running numbers my father claimed were too technical. He never noticed. You'll thank me someday, he said, dismissing me with a wave. It's time you found something suitable. I left without another word. It took every ounce of pride I had not to look back. For months, I lived on the outskirts of New York, sharing a studio apartment with 2 roommates, building a new version of myself from scratch. The first version of Aurora Capital Advisors started on a borrowed laptop at a second-hand desk. I worked with small sustainable businesses, women-owned startups, clean energy suppliers, community credit programs ignored by men like my father. What began as a side project turned into a movement. Within 3 years, Aurora was managing $30 million in assets. Within 5, we were in 3 cities with 35 employees and 2 regional directors, but no one, not even my closest staff, knew my real last name. I used my mother's maiden name, Grace Ellison, and kept Whitmore buried deep behind NDAs and private filings. Success is quietest when no one believes you're capable of it. I learned to speak softly, but move strategically. Every partnership, every contract, every risk was calculated with surgical precision. The irony was poetic. The daughter considered too fragile for finance had built one of the fastest-growing sustainable investment firms in the region without a single cent of Whitmore money. My assistant Nora once asked, "Why don't you go public? You could dominate Boston if they knew you're one of them." I smiled. Exactly. That's why I won't. Silence was my weapon. While the Whitmores were chasing reputation, I was building credibility. My firm's logo, an abstract sunburst, symbolized what I'd lost and rebuilt, light, without the need for permission. Our next expansion target was the Harrington portfolio. Richard Harrington, a man revered in my father's circle, was known for precision and principle. The same man Ethan was desperate to impress. I'd studied his firm's weaknesses, heavy fossil investments, an outdated PR model, a desperate need for a sustainability partner. Aurora offered exactly what he lacked. For months, my team and I negotiated through intermediaries' NDAs and silent board calls. Harrington knew me only as G. Ellison's CEO, until last week when he'd requested a meeting in person. "We'd like to move forward," his assistant had written. "Mr. Harrington is impressed by your firm's integrity. He'd like to meet the woman behind Aurora." When I saw his name on the guest list for my family's gala, the air left my lungs. My mother had worshipped the Harrington family for years. She once said Richard's wife belonged to a higher class of grace. The irony almost made me laugh. I wasn't just meeting Richard Harrington as an equal. I was about to become his partner in a multi-million-dollar fund. The same man my family was desperate to charm would soon sign his name next to mine. Late that night, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Skyline laptop open, reviewing the final contract draft. My reflection in the window looked calm, but my pulse carried the rhythm of 5 years of silence, finally ready to break. I thought about the girl who used to clean up Ethan's spreadsheets and endure her mother's subtle disdain. She was gone. I'd rebuilt her into something unstoppable. In less than 72 hours, the Whitmores would finally see the daughter they tried to erase, and they wouldn't recognize her. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing Aurora's final contract revisions. My phone lit up with my mother's name, and instinctively, my shoulders tensed. Elaine Whitmore never called to check in, she called to assign. I answered already, bracing myself. "Grace," she said in that clipped, commanding tone I'd known since childhood. "Cancel whatever you have planned this weekend. We need you here. The Whitmore Foundation's annual gala is on Sunday, and it's an absolute priority." I kept my voice even. "Mom, you have an entire events committee." "What do you need me for coordination?" she said, as if it were obvious. "The caterers are hopeless, and your brother's too busy arranging his presentation for Mr. Harrington to help. We can't afford mistakes this year. He'll be there, you know, Richard Harrington himself." Imagine what this could mean for Ethan's career. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang. Of course. The Harrington appearance wasn't about charity, it was about status. It always was. "I'm flying to New York Monday morning," I said carefully. "I have a business meeting." She scoffed. "A business meeting, Grace? Let's be serious. You're 38, not 28. These little projects of yours can wait. Family comes first." I almost laughed. Family came first when it benefited them. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, tone flat. Everything she said. "Oversee the setup, fix the menu, and please, for heaven's sake, don't wear black again. You blend into the staff." I pressed my fingers to my temples. "I am the staff, apparently." "Don't be dramatic," she said briskly. "You're good at organizing. It's the one area where you truly shine." I glanced at the framed photo on my office wall, Aurora's first team smiling after landing our first $1 million client. "Right," I murmured. "Organizing." Before I could refuse, she added, "Grace, this is about the family's reputation. If Ethan makes a good impression on Richard Harrington, doors could open for all of us." That last line caught my attention, not because of what she meant, but because of what she didn't. They had no idea that the same Richard Harrington was meeting me 48 hours later to finalize a joint venture worth 8 figures. "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." "Good girl," she said, relief flooding her tone. "Come early. Noon Saturday. And please don't make a scene." When the call ended, I sat motionless, staring at the contract glowing on my laptop screen. The Harrington partnership was the culmination of years of silent labor, long nights, quiet rejections, small victories, and now fate had arranged a collision so perfect it almost felt orchestrated. They would all be in the same room. My parents, my brother, and the man they'd spent years idolizing, unaware that I was the one negotiating with him behind the scenes. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan. "Mom says you're helping at the gala. Don't screw it up. Harrington's team is high profile. Try not to embarrass us." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back a single word. "Sure." After that, I turned off my phone. I couldn't decide whether the universe had a cruel sense of humor or a brilliant one. Maybe both. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed Aurora's presentation slides. The final page displayed the partnership title, Aurora Capital Advisors, plus Harrington Global Investments, Sustainable Growth Initiative. Underneath in fine print, my name, Grace Ellison, co-founder and CEO. The irony was almost cinematic. My family would spend the weekend chasing the attention of a man who 2 days later would call me partner. For a brief second, I considered telling them. Then I pictured my mother's dismissive smile, my father's skeptical squint, Ethan's condescending laugh. No, I thought. Let them find out the way the world would publicly. I closed the laptop, the faint hum of the city outside syncing with my heartbeat. The stage was set. All I had to do was show up and let the truth perform itself. Before the world called me successful, my family called me convenient. That truth had been cemented long before Aurora Capital existed, back when I was 28 and standing in a sterile hospital room watching machines breathe for my father. He'd suffered a mild stroke then, and I was the one who dropped everything to come home. I remember the phone call vividly. "Grace, it's your father," my mother had said, voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. "He needs you." I'd just received an acceptance letter to Wharton's MBA program, a dream I'd worked years to achieve. My professors had celebrated, colleagues had congratulated me, and for the first time I felt I might actually carve out a future that was mine. But I went home. I always went home. The doctor said Harold would need months of rehabilitation and someone had to manage his affairs. Ethan was too busy with clients, Mom was too emotional, and I apparently was built for sacrifice. For 6 months, I handled bills, correspondence, medical schedules, and every uncomfortable silence in between. I slept on a couch in the library because my old room had been converted into storage for Ethan's golf trophies. When Harold regained his speech, he thanked me once, then told me to fetch his portfolio binder. It took me years to recognize what that moment truly meant. It wasn't love. It was expectation disguised as gratitude. When he recovered fully, I expected to return to Philadelphia and reclaim my future. Instead, my mother staged her quiet guilt campaign. "You can't leave now," she'd said over breakfast. "Your father still needs balance therapy." Ethan's overwhelmed. "Be practical, dear." So I stayed another year, then another. Opportunities slipped away, one acceptance deferred into oblivion. By the time my father insisted Ethan take over the firm's new project, I'd already become the invisible scaffolding of their lives, holding everything upright while they took the credit. I'd tell myself it was temporary, that loyalty would earn respect. It never did. One night during one of Harold's charity banquets, I overheard my mother telling a guest Grace has such a nurturing spirit. "She's like the glue in this family." The woman replied kindly. "Then she must be proud to see Ethan taking the lead." My mother's response was soft but lethal. "Of course, Grace has never been ambitious." I remember standing behind the curtain holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, realizing that in their eyes my devotion was proof of weakness. I smiled and kept walking. That's what women in my family did. We smiled and kept walking while the men collected applause. Back in the present as I packed for the gala weekend, those memories pressed against me like ghosts demanding acknowledgement. People often assume success erases pain. It doesn't. It only sharpens the memory of every moment you were told you'd never have it. My success was born not from inspiration, but exhaustion from the quiet decision that I would never again trade my worth for their comfort. I folded my presentation notes carefully into a leather folder, the same kind my father used to carry. The difference was that mine represented freedom, not authority. I thought about that girl in the hospital spoon-feeding her father soup while dreaming of classrooms she'd never see, and I whispered to her, "We made it anyway." The sacrifice they never thanked me for had become the foundation of the empire they didn't know existed. It wasn't revenge I felt now. It was justice, patient, deliberate, inevitable. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about choosing myself. Saturday arrived with the kind of December chill that bites through glass. The Whitmore estate was already humming with controlled chaos, florists unloading boxes, caterers, whispering about deadlines, and my mother directing traffic in heels that could cut marble. When I walked in, she gave me a look that measured disapproval before warmth. Finally, she said, "The seating chart is a disaster. Fix it." I took the clipboard from her hand. "Hello to you too." She sighed as if I were a teenager again. "Grace, please. Not today. We have important guests, investors, politicians, Richard Harrington. Your father's reputation depends on this going smoothly." My father was in the study, voice booming into a phone call about market forecasts. Ethan sat in the parlor with a glass of scotch rehearsing talking points. I'd seen this scene 1,000 times, the men planning legacy while the women managed image. I glanced around at the house, ornate, suffocating, unchanged. My childhood home had become a museum of my own absence. "Where are the caterers?" I asked. "Late," Elaine said sharply. "As usual. I told you we can't rely on others." I held back a smile. "You could always hire Aurora Events." "Aurora?" She frowned. "Never heard of them." "They're excellent," I said. "Professional, discreet, very successful." She waved me off. "We don't need strangers. Just make sure the tableware sparkles." Upstairs in my old room, now a storage space for Ethan's golf awards, I found my suitcase and laptop. On the screen glowed the final Aurora presentation deck. Monday, 10 a.m. Harrington Global. Projected partnership value $80 million. My name, Grace Ellison, co-founder and CEO. My pulse steadied. This wasn't nerves, it was alignment. Downstairs, Ethan shouted for me. "Grace, Mom says you're in charge of the flowers. Don't mess up the color coordination. Richard Harrington likes neutral palettes." I leaned on the banister. "How do you know what he likes?" "Because I've done my research," he said smugly, "and because he's the kind of man who notices details. You wouldn't understand." He smirked, then added, "You'll be useful tonight if you stay out of the way." That was the line that made something click in me. Not anger this time, but clarity. I'd spent my whole life playing the quiet helper, the backstage hand. Tonight I'd wear that invisibility like armor. It would be my last night pretending to be small. My mother's voice echoed from the hall. "Grace, you're handling Harrington's table. Try to look approachable, dear. You have that serious look." I smiled thinly. "I'll do my best." As the day faded into evening, I double-checked every detail because perfection ironically was my rebellion. If this gala was to be their stage, I'd make sure the lighting was just right for the reveal they didn't see coming. At sunset, I changed into a black velvet gown, sleek, understated, professional. My mother frowned when she saw me. Black again. "You'll look like staff." "Perfect," I said softly. She didn't catch it. At 7 o'clock, guests began arriving. Laughter echoed through the marble foyer, the clink of champagne glasses filling the air. From the kitchen, I could see the reflection of chandeliers on polished glassware, each shimmer like a countdown. I passed through the crowd, unnoticed like always, serving, observing, absorbing. But this time, I was taking inventory. I saw Richard Harrington arrive flanked by 2 associates. My mother's eyes lit up like a woman spotting royalty. Ethan straightened his tie palms, already sweating. I remained in the background, calm and deliberate. They had no idea that the man they were trying so desperately to impress already had my name written next to his in a contract waiting to be signed. When our eyes met briefly across the room, Richard's expression flickered recognition, then restraint. He gave a polite nod as though we were strangers. I returned it. The performance had begun. By 7:30, the Whitmore estate had transformed into a theater of perfection, or at least the illusion of it. Candles lined the marble staircase, a string quartet played softly near the fountain, and guests drifted through the grand foyer, murmuring words like legacy and prestige. I stood near the service entrance with a clipboard pretending to coordinate staff, but really watching the scene unfold. The scent of white roses and expensive perfume hung thick in the air. My mother moved through the crowd like a conductor smiling with every muscle but her eyes. My father shook hands with men who still called him sir, though his investments had been floundering for years. Ethan, ever the showman, played the part of heir apparent. I'd been erased so thoroughly from the family narrative that no one questioned why I was there. They assumed I was part of the staff, which suited me perfectly. Richard Harrington arrived a few minutes later, his entrance quiet but magnetic. He wasn't tall or loud, but the energy in the room shifted. My mother nearly tripped over herself getting to him. "Mr. Harrington," she gushed, "what an honor, we've admired your work for so long." Richard smiled politely. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for having me." My father appeared at her shoulder, hand extended. "Harold Whitmore, my son Ethan's been following your fund's performance. Impressive numbers." Richard shook his hand, then glanced around the room as though cataloging every detail. His gaze brushed over me briefly. "No sign of recognition." "Smart man." My mother continued her monologue. "Ethan's been managing the Whitmore portfolio since Harold retired. Such a talent Grace, our daughter, is between jobs right now, but she helps with the family charity events." There it was the same rehearsed humiliation wrapped in gentility. Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. He knew exactly what she'd said. I wanted to look away, but instead I met his gaze directly for a heartbeat enough to say I heard it too. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned back to my father. "You've raised quite a capable family," he said smoothly, and if irony had a temperature, the room would have frozen. Ethan stepped forward, eager. "I'd love to discuss potential collaborations sometime, Mr. Harrington. We're building something big here." Richard smiled. "I'm sure you are." Later, as servers refilled glasses, I watched the three of them surround him, my parents and Ethan, circling like hopeful planets around a new sun. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was distance. This was the world they'd chosen to worship, approval over integrity, connection over competence. In that moment, I understood exactly what kind of justice was coming. Near the buffet, my mother hissed at a server for placing the wrong garnish on the salmon. "Do you have any idea who's eating this?" she snapped. "Fix it or you'll ruin everything." Her reflection in the silver platter looked nothing like the woman she pretended to be. Richard approached her again, glass in hand. "Lovely event," he said. "May I ask who coordinated all this?" "Our daughter Grace," she replied proudly, and then with a dismissive laugh. "She's not really career-minded, but she has a good eye for presentation." Richard looked at me over her shoulder, eyes steady. "She certainly does," he said, and walked away. My mother beamed, mistaking the tone for flattery. By the time dessert was served, the evening was flawless on the surface, but tension hummed beneath. I'd never seen Richard watch anyone the way he watched the Whitmores. Every interaction was a note in a symphony he was already composing. He excused himself around 10, promising to be in touch with Ethan soon. My mother practically glowed. As I collected empty glasses from the table, Richard paused near the door, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "See you Monday, Ms. Whitmore." My heart stopped, then steadied. The performance was over. Act 2 would take place on my stage. By Monday morning, New York was gray and electric, the kind of sky that warns something monumental is about to happen. I arrived at Harrington Global's glass tower 15 minutes early, black coat over my navy suit portfolio in hand. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor was silent except for the hum of power, the kind of silence reserved for people who belonged there. I did. Richard's assistant greeted me warmly. "Ms. Ellison, Mr. Harrington will see you shortly." The name still felt like armor. Grace Ellison, the woman I'd built from the ashes of Grace Whitmore. Inside the boardroom, the long table gleamed like liquid obsidian. The skyline stretched endlessly behind it, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Richard entered, shaking my hand with the kind of recognition that carried weight. "Ms. Ellison," he said, smiling. "You look rested. I trust your weekend went smoothly." I allowed a small smile, eventful. His brow lifted slightly, but he didn't ask. Instead, he gestured to the documents on the table. Let's begin. For the next 2 hours, the presentation flowed flawlessly. Financials, projections, sustainability models. My team had prepared every figure, every potential question, every contingency. At the close, Richard's voice carried across the room like a verdict. Harrington Global is proud to partner with Aurora Capital Advisors. You've built something exceptional. We stood to shake hands as the cameras clicked. Congratulations, Ms. Ellison. The press release goes out at noon. Forbes requested an early statement. They're doing a feature on women-led firms redefining sustainable investment. Send them my regards, I said. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed a text from my mother. Urgent. Call me immediately. I ignored it. Richard was signing the final document when his assistant entered holding a tablet. Sir, you'll want to see this. He frowned, reading the screen, then looked up at me with quiet amusement. Well, it seems the world works in circles. I leaned forward slightly. What is it? He turned the tablet around. On LinkedIn, a photo from Saturday's gala was going viral, my mother standing beside him, mortified expression, mid-sentence, a caption that read, "The hostess who bragged about her daughter's failure just met the CEO her son is desperate to impress." The comment section was a storm industry professionals connecting dots between Aurora Capital's announcement and the Whitmore family's social downfall. Someone had noticed the resemblance between Grace Ellison and Grace Whitmore. The speculation spread like fire. Do you want me to issue a statement? Richard asked calmly. I exhaled slowly. No, let them guess. By noon, Forbes published its story, From Obedience to Ownership. How Grace Whitmore, now known professionally as Grace Ellison, built Aurora Capital without a cent of family backing. My phone exploded calls from reporters, colleagues, old classmates, even my father. I didn't answer any of them. At 12:17, a voicemail came through from my mother, her voice trembling between rage and panic. Grace, what have you done? Everyone's talking about it. Do you have any idea how humiliated we are? People at the club. Harold can't even show his face. Ethan's investors are calling him a fraud. Fix this. Tell them it's not true. But it was true, every word. I stared at the window overlooking Manhattan, the city that had witnessed my evolution from servant to sovereign. I played the voicemail once more, then deleted it. An hour later, Richard returned to the boardroom. The story's already viral. Your firm's website crashed twice. Congratulations, Ms. Ellison. You're officially the most talked about woman in finance this week. I smiled faintly. My mother wanted recognition. She got it. Richard laughed, not unkindly. You didn't destroy them, you revealed them. That's what truth does, I said quietly. He extended a glass of champagne. To truth, then, and to women who refuse to stay invisible. As the glass touched mine, I knew the real reckoning had only just begun. Back in Connecticut, the Whitmore name was collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance, and this time I wasn't there to clean it up. By evening, the fallout had evolved from whispers to wildfire. My mother's carefully curated social circle, the same women who once complimented her pearls while silently envying her position, had turned on her like a pack sensing blood. Screenshots of the Forbes article circulated through every Connecticut group chat faster than her denial could keep up. She called again at 8 p.m. Grace! She began without preamble, her tone trembling between fury and desperation. You've ruined us. The Harringtons won't return Ethan's calls. The charity board asked for my resignation. Harold's golf club is gossiping like schoolchildren. You could have spared us this humiliation. I sat in my apartment overlooking the city lights, a soft jazz record spinning in the background. Mom, I said evenly, you humiliated yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up the evidence. How can you be so cruel? She whispered. We're your family. Family, I repeated quietly. Family doesn't make you earn love through servitude. Family doesn't erase you until it's convenient to remember your name. She inhaled sharply. You're being dramatic. You've always misunderstood how things work. We did our best. Your best, I said, was silence when Ethan called me a failure at dinner. Your best was taking credit for every fundraiser I organized while telling people I wasn't career-minded. Your best was treating me like a maid while worshiping investors who couldn't spell your name. The line went quiet. For the first time in my life, I heard something unfamiliar in her voice, uncertainty. I never meant to hurt you, she said finally. You just never meant to notice me, I replied. That's worse. Before she could respond, I ended the call. Some endings require silence, not apologies. Minutes later, Ethan's number appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Grace," he said, voice tight with barely contained panic. "What the hell did you do? Do you realize Harrington pulled his funding from my proposal? Half my investors are demanding an audit. I'm being accused of using your work without disclosure. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." "It's not," I said simply. "You've been coasting on my research for years. Maybe they finally noticed." "You're destroying the family name." "No, I said I'm redefining it." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than us now?" "I don't think I said." "I know." I hung up before he could answer. At midnight, my inbox overflowed congratulations from colleagues, invitations from conferences, partnership offers from firms that once dismissed me. Forbes tagged me in a tweet that read, "Grace Whitmore's quiet empire isn't just a business, it's a revolution." The next morning, I received a call from Richard. "They'll recover eventually," he said. "People like your parents always find a new narrative." "Maybe," I said, "but this time it won't include me." He was quiet for a moment. "You handled it with more grace than I would have." I smiled at the irony of my own name. "No, I just handled it with boundaries." Later that afternoon, a handwritten note arrived at my office, no return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. My father's. "Grace, I should have seen it. You were always the one holding everything together. I let pride blind me. I'm sorry I didn't fight for you when it mattered. You were never the disappointment we were. Your success doesn't humiliate us. It reveals us. Whatever you do next, do it for yourself, not for revenge. You've earned peace." For the first time in years, I felt my throat tighten. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Revenge had never been the goal. Justice was. And justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar, it whispers, "You're free." The next week unfolded like a slow-motion implosion of everything the Whitmores once worshipped. The Connecticut newspapers ran headlines that blurred humiliation with fascination philanthropy power couple. Silent after daughter's Forbes revelation. The country club rescinded my mother's committee chairmanship. Ethan's firm, once propped up by borrowed credibility, hemorrhaged clients overnight. The Harrington rumor alone was enough word spread that Ethan had tried to claim Aurora Capital's sustainable investment proposal as his own. His fund's investors demanded proof. When he couldn't produce any, the board suspended him pending review. From my office, I watched it all unfold in real time. Nora, my assistant, entered with a coffee and her usual dry humor. "You've officially become a case study," she said, handing me her tablet. "CNN Business wants to feature you in a segment called The Family You Outgrew." I raised an eyebrow. "Catchy." "Your mother's PR firm sent an inquiry, too," she added carefully. "They want to issue a joint statement say it was all a misunderstanding. Rebuild the Whitmore image as a family of diverse success stories." I laughed softly. "They're trying to turn consequence into branding." Nora smiled. "You're not responding right." "Not yet," I said. "They need silence more than they need defense." By Friday, the Whitmore name had become shorthand for hypocrisy. At the last charity auction, one of my mother's friends was overheard saying Elaine should have invested in her daughter instead of her designer dinners. My father, ever the stoic patriarch, withdrew from public view completely. But I knew he'd read every article. He was a man who understood markets, and he knew reputational collapse when he saw one. That night, a message arrived from an unknown number. "Dinner neutral ground. We need to talk." It was signed Dad. I agreed. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant in Manhattan. He looked older, smaller somehow. The suit was still expensive, but the posture was gone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled. "You've made quite the impact." "I built something," I said simply. "You just never saw it." He nodded, eyes heavy. "I saw it. I just didn't want to admit it. You remind me of your grandfather. He built his fortune from nothing. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you in the family circle." "Protecting me?" I asked quietly. "You kept me hidden. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Your mother can't face what she's done. Ethan blames everyone but himself." He hesitated. "I just want to understand. Why the secrecy? Why change your name?" I met his gaze evenly. "Because the Whitmore name opened doors for everyone but me. I wanted to see what I was worth without it." He swallowed, looking down. "And what did you find?" "Freedom," I said. "And peace. They're expensive, but they're worth more than any legacy." He gave a sad smile. You sound like someone who doesn't need her family. I needed you once I said. Now I just need truth. He reached into his coat and slid an envelope across the table. For you, not money papers. Your mother's lawyer tried to block me from showing you this. It's her resignation letter from the Whitmore Foundation. She finally admitted to misusing funds for personal events. Quietly, of course. But it's done. I studied the letter in silence. It was strange relief and grief braided together. She's lost everything she thought made her matter, he said. Maybe now she'll see what actually does. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. Grace, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm proud of you. It wasn't redemption, but it was honesty, and for the first time, that was enough. As I walked back to my apartment that night, snow began to fall soft and deliberate. The city glittered under it clean, new, forgiving. I thought of my family's empire of appearances collapsing under its own weight and how I'd survived not by fighting them but by outgrowing them. Justice hadn't come in the form of revenge. It came in the form of distance and the kind of success that doesn't beg to be seen. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my office embossed with the Whitmore crest. Inside, a single page written in my mother's precise looping script. Grace, please. We need to talk, face to face. The family can't move forward like this. Sunday, 2 p.m. at the house. I read it twice before folding it neatly back into the envelope. Nora watched me from her desk. Are you going? I think I have to, I said quietly. Not for them for closure. Sunday came gray and cold, the kind of stillness that makes sound travel farther than it should. The Whitmore estate looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the illusion of power. The gates were open this time. No guards, no ceremony, just silence. My mother waited in the sitting room wearing pearls that no longer shone. Ethan stood near the window arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. My father sat in his old chair, calm, resigned. Grace, my mother said, softly rising as I entered. You look different. I said. She gestured for me to sit. We've been talking, your father, Ethan, and I. We've lost a great deal. Reputation, clients, friends. But the worst part, the part I can't sleep over, is that we lost you. Her voice trembled, but it was careful. Practiced. I want to make things right. I leaned forward. You can't undo 15 years of condescension with one meeting, Mom. I know, she said quickly, but we're willing to try. I placed a leather folder on the coffee table and slid it toward her. Inside were 5 printed pages, clear numbered, typed in black ink. These are my terms. Her brows furrowed. Terms. Yes, if you truly want reconciliation, it starts with boundaries. She opened the folder and began reading aloud, her voice cracking slightly as she went. 1. Equal respect in all interactions. No more belittling remarks, private or public. 2. No exploitation. I will not cook, plan, host, or manage your events again. 3. Public acknowledgement. A formal statement recognizing my work and the harm caused by years of dismissal. 4. Therapy. Family and individual sessions. Non-negotiable. 5. Apology. Not a press statement, not a social maneuver. A genuine one. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached the end. You wrote this like a contract. It's the only language this family respects, I said. Ethan scoffed from across the room. This is ridiculous. You think you can dictate terms like some corporate merger? I looked at him evenly. Yes, because this is the only kind of negotiation we've ever had. My father cleared his throat. Grace, your mother's trying? Dad, I interrupted gently. You're the only one who ever sees the truth. Don't ruin that by defending lies. He sighed, eyes heavy. She's right, Elaine. We did this. We built a hierarchy instead of a family. My mother's face softened. For the first time, she looked genuinely small. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Start by telling the truth, I said quietly. Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them away before they could fall. I was jealous, she admitted. You were stronger than I ever was, and I resented you for it. Every time you stood tall, I felt smaller. I made you invisible so I could feel important. And I see now it cost us everything. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. Mom! She shook her head. No, she deserves to hear it. I felt the tightness in my chest begin to loosen, not because of forgiveness, but because of recognition. Thank you, I said. That's a start. My father reached for the contract. We'll sign it. Ethan muttered something about pride, but I didn't listen. For the first time, I stood in that room not as their helper, their disappointment, or their shadow, but as their equal. When I left, my mother followed me to the door. "Grace," she said softly, "if I asked you to cater one last dinner, not for show, but for family, would you?" I met her eyes. "You can hire Stellar Events," I said, "but full price." She blinked, then laughed through tears. Fair. Spring came early that year, soft and forgiving. I hosted my first family dinner in my Manhattan apartment 6 months later, a modern sunlit space overlooking Central Park. It wasn't the Whitmore estate, but it didn't need to be. This one felt earned. The dining table gleamed under the pendant lights set not with silver monograms, but with handmade pottery I'd bought from a local artisan. The aroma of rosemary and roasted vegetables filled the air, prepared by one of my Stellar Events chefs. I didn't cook anymore, not for family, not for validation. That chapter had closed. When the doorbell rang, I paused for a deep breath. My father entered first, carrying a small box of wine, his attempt at peace. My mother followed pearls replaced with simple gold earrings. Ethan came last, quiet, subdued. Gone was the arrogance that once filled every room he entered. "Grace," my mother said softly, "this is beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. "Take a seat." Dinner began with careful politeness, like strangers relearning how to speak. My mother complimented the food my father asked about Aurora's expansion, and Ethan nodded along. It felt human, finally stripped of pretense. Halfway through the meal, my father raised his glass. "To Grace," he said, "for teaching us what legacy actually means." My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't interrupt. And to accountability, I added quietly, raising my own glass. The clink of crystal sounded like a full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. After dessert, I handed each of them an envelope. "What's this?" my mother asked, cautious. "A copy of the Whitmore Foundation's relaunch plan," I said. "I'm reopening it under new leadership and with new principles. Transparent Operations Community grants educational funding for women entrepreneurs. It'll be run under Aurora's ethics code." Ethan frowned. "You're taking it over." "I'm rebuilding it," I corrected. "The foundation used to be about social appearances. Now it'll be about actual change." My father nodded approvingly. "That's what it should have been from the start." My mother exhaled. "You really are rewriting everything." "I have to," I said simply. "When systems are built on silence, you can't patch them, you rebuild them." Silence followed, but this time it wasn't tense. It was reflective. My mother finally said, "I've started therapy. I talk about you a lot, about the things I missed, the woman I didn't see." I met her eyes. "Keep talking, it's the only way forward." For the first time in years, I saw not the matriarch who demanded perfection, but the woman beneath the armor flawed, frightened, and finally honest. Later, as they left, my mother lingered by the door. "Grace," she whispered, "I'm proud of you. Not because of Forbes or Aurora, because you stopped needing us to be proud." It wasn't an apology. It was something deeper, a recognition of equality. I smiled softly. That's all I ever wanted. When the door closed, the apartment fell silent except for the hum of the city outside. I walked to the window, watching the lights shimmer across the park. My reflection stared back, not the invisible daughter, not the obedient helper, but a woman who had built her own universe from the debris of neglect. The world had begun to move differently around me. Aurora Capital now operated in 5 cities. The Forbes story had become a college case study on resilience and autonomy. Richard Harrington and I remained partners in business and quiet allies in principle. We never needed to say much. The shared understanding between survivors of legacy was enough. Occasionally, I'd receive messages from people who'd read my story, women who'd written, "I chose myself too," men who'd admitted I didn't see what my daughter was going through. Now I do. Those words mattered more than any award ever could. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review the final draft of my book, From Shadow to Structure Building a Life That Doesn't Need Permission. The dedication read simply, "To the invisible ones, may you stop asking for recognition and start owning the room." I hit save and looked out at the skyline again. Somewhere in Connecticut, my parents were learning how to be people, not performances. Ethan was learning humility the way all fallen heirs do by working, not boasting. And I was learning peace. Success hadn't healed everything, but it had given me language clarity and freedom, the kind you can't buy or beg for. I lifted my glass toward the night and whispered, "To the maid they never saw coming." And for the first time, it wasn't a statement of revenge, it was a declaration of arrival.